Tonight, we begin with the bizarre, ambitious, and sometimes eyebrow-free world of medieval beauty standards. A world where the goal wasn't to look healthy, but rather like someone who'd just been politely exorcised. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up every morning and paint your face with white lead powder, knowing it was slowly poisoning you? To pluck out every single eyebrow because a smooth, vast forehead was considered elegant and divine? To dye your hair with urine and saffron, hoping for that golden angelic glow, only to hide it all under a towering cone-shaped hat the moment you got married? These were not the choices of a few eccentrics. They were the ideals of an entire era, enforced by poets, painters, priests, and peers. What did it mean to be beautiful in the Middle Ages? And why did looking slightly ill become the ultimate status symbol? Tonight, we'll drift through the strange, sometimes deadly, and always fascinating beauty rituals of medieval Europe. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into history's strangest corners, take a moment to subscribe to Little Historical. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, perhaps a blanket, and let us begin. In the medieval world, looking pale wasn't a sign that you needed more sleep. It was a fashion statement, a social flex, a silent announcement to the world that said, "I'm too rich to ever see the sun. Thank you very much." Unlike today, where a healthy glow might suggest yoga, smoothies, or a trip to the coast, medieval beauty flipped the script. Tan skin meant you worked outside, which meant you were poor, which meant, gasp, manual labor. And nothing said not beautiful in the 14th century like knowing how to milk a cow. So, the paler you were, the higher your perceived status. And when we say pale, we don't mean a soft ivory glow. We're talking translucent porcelain with vascular undertones. Skin so light it looked like you might have been recently startled by a ghost, or were a ghost. Of course, nature doesn't always cooperate, especially if you were born with an actual working circulatory system. So people helped it along. Noble women, and even men occasionally, would apply white lead powder to their faces. It provided that signature corpse-chic glow, and as a bonus, slowly poisoned you. But beauty has always had its price. Some used vinegar-soaked cloths to bleach their skin. Others applied a mixture of crushed pearls and egg whites, which not only lightened the face but also had the side effect of making one's cheeks feel like a stale omelette. Veins were sometimes painted onto the arms and chest using blue pigment to simulate delicacy, because nothing says noble like pretending your skin is about to split open. Even literature got in on it. Romantic poems described women as pale as milk, white as snow, and once as the moon in winter, which is a nice way of saying she looks like she might faint. I love it. This pale aesthetic wasn't just about beauty. It was shorthand for class, purity, and complete economic disengagement with agriculture. If you could afford to be fragile, you were winning. There was a quiet sensuality in that fragility. A woman so ethereal that a strong breeze might carry her away, or so delicate that a touch could leave a bruise. It invited protection, devotion, and a certain kind of longing. But beneath the powdered surface lurked something darker. The very substances that created that luminous illusion were corroding the body from within. Lead and mercury didn't just whiten, they withered. Hair fell out. Skin ulcerated. Yet the women who wore these poisons did so willingly, because the alternative, being mistaken for a commoner, was unthinkable. They were playing a high-stakes game where the prize was social survival and the cost was measured in years. And as they gazed into their polished bronze mirrors, they saw not the damage accumulating beneath their cheeks, but the reflection of a world that valued appearance over health, status over sanity. That obsession with alabaster skin was only the beginning. Because once you had the right pallor, you still had to deal with your forehead, your eyebrows, and the scandalous intrusion of hair where no hair should be. The next step in medieval beauty was perhaps the strangest of all, the pursuit of a forehead so vast it could host a joust. And that, dear listener, is where our story turns. The pursuit of alabaster skin was only the beginning. Because once you had the right pallor, you still had to deal with your forehead, your eyebrows, and the scandalous intrusion of hair where no hair should be. But before we ascend to those lofty ideals, let us linger on the poisonous price of that luminous glow. Beauty in the Middle Ages often required commitment. And by commitment, we mean a slow, decorative form of chemical warfare on yourself. Because for those striving to achieve that prestigious pale complexion, nature just wasn't enough. So they reached for makeup, specifically, lead-based white face powder. Yes, lead, as in the thing we now seal off old buildings for. But back then it was considered cutting edge. The result was a smooth, pale, matte finish, the medieval equivalent of high-end foundation. It made the skin look flawless and, eventually, feel very not flawless. White lead powder was made by combining vinegar and metal, then allowing it to corrode into a white crust that could be ground into a fine powder. Apply that daily, and voila, you looked like a luminous, delicate aristocrat with a secret death wish. And if your skin began to flake, blister, or fall off in small diplomatic chunks, even better. It meant the makeup was working. Probably. This wasn't a one-product routine either. Many added mercury-based rouge for color or chalk dust for more staying power. Egg whites were brushed over the face for a smooth, glazed look. Basically, if it came from a barn or an alchemist's shelf, someone had rubbed it on their face in the name of elegance. The downside, other than the obvious slow poisoning, lead-based products caused everything from chronic fatigue and skin ulcers to hair loss and premature death, which is not listed on most modern skincare labels. But the fashion endured because if the choice was between dying slowly and being mistaken for a peasant, nobility often chose the scenic route to the grave. There is a terrible intimacy in this ritual. A woman sitting before her mirror, carefully patting poison into her cheeks, knowing that each application brought her closer to ruin. Her lover might admire her porcelain complexion, unaware that the very pallor he found so enchanting was a death sentence. The rouge that gave her lips their berry stain was eating away at her from the inside. And yet she smiled. Because beauty was power, and power was worth any price. Men weren't always immune either. Some male courtiers also used powders or skin treatments, especially in the later medieval and early Renaissance courts, where image mattered almost as much as lineage, or at least as much as smelling less terrible than your rival. So they, too, risked their health for the sake of a glance, a whispered compliment, a fleeting sense of superiority. But of all the medieval beauty trends, the obsession with high foreheads may be the most eyebrow-raising, literally, because people were removing their eyebrows for it. And that, dear listener, is where our journey into the strange world of medieval grooming now turns. But of all the medieval beauty trends, the obsession with high foreheads may be the most eyebrow-raising, literally, because people were removing their eyebrows for it. And that, dear listener, is where our journey into the strange world of medieval grooming now turns. A tall, smooth, uninterrupted forehead wasn't just fashionable. It was considered elegant, intelligent, and divine. It was the architectural marvel of the medieval face. The ideal forehead said, "I spend my days reading psalms and looking pensively out of castle windows. Not I own a shovel." To achieve this noble look, women went to extreme and frankly itchy measures. Eyebrows were plucked out completely, and sometimes even scalp hair was removed inch by inch to push the hairline further back. This wasn't a trim. This was a full-on forehead expansion project. Medieval grooming manuals advised women to use tweezers, hot cloths, and depilatory creams made from things like cat dung, quicklime, or vinegar-soaked leeches, all in the name of showcasing a forehead that could double as a sundial. The results were striking. Portraits from the time show women with serene expressions and foreheads so vast you could host a joust on them. Combined with pale skin and soft facial features, this high-dome aesthetic became shorthand for refined beauty. There was something almost erotic in that expanse of bare skin, a vulnerability, a blank canvas inviting admiration. A man might gaze at that smooth forehead and imagine the thoughts behind it, pure and untouchable. The removal of eyebrows also had a practical, if unsettling, effect. It made the eyes appear larger, more luminous, more like a startled doe. And in the game of courtly love, wide, innocent eyes were a deadly weapon. Fashion supported this look. Tight-fitting hoods, wimples, and hennins, those famous cone-shaped hats, all helped pull the hairline up, or at least hide the part where your eyebrows used to live. And this wasn't just some isolated castle trend. From England to France to Italy, noble women leaned into the high forehead style, while artists and poets reinforced it by praising women whose faces began somewhere near the crown of the head. Of course, not everyone could afford the time or tools to pluck themselves into perfection. So, in a moment of medieval ingenuity, some women faked it by drawing their new forehead slightly higher and covering the rest with headbands or veils. That's right, the Middle Ages had their own version of contouring. It just involved a lot more fabric. But the high forehead was only half the story. Once a woman was married, all that carefully cultivated hair had to disappear. And that leads us to the strange world of veils, wimples, and the towering hennin, where hair became a secret and modesty became a fashion statement. In medieval Europe, if your hair didn't look like it had been kissed by holy light or stolen from a bottle angel, you were already starting from behind. Blonde hair in particular was the medieval gold standard. It was associated with youth, beauty, virtue, and, in case you needed divine backup, the Virgin Mary was frequently painted as a blonde, even though she was geographically speaking almost certainly not. Realism was less important than radiance. If you were born blonde, congratulations. You were considered blessed and probably got out of a few chores. But natural blondness didn't last, especially in adulthood. So medieval women took matters into their own hands, and sometimes cauldrons. Homemade hair lightening concoctions included saffron, chamomile, ash, honey, and lye. Applied liberally, then left to bake under the sun in a method known as sunbasking. It worked best if you had the patience of a nun and the skin of a salamander. Some recipes also included urine, which was thought to help lift color. Whose urine? That part was less regulated. But as long as it gave your hair that celestial shimmer, it was deemed worth it. Beauty is, and always has been, a little bit disgusting. Hair texture mattered, too. Loose, long, wavy locks were the ideal, preferably cascading down your back like a divine curtain. But this luxury was reserved for unmarried women. Once married, your golden maner was to be hidden under veils, nets, and head wraps. Because apparently the moment you said "I do," your hair became a national security risk. For noble women, hair was often braided, twisted, or tucked into elaborate styles, especially when attending court or religious events. These hairstyles were frequently accessorized with silk ribbons, beads, or embroidery, just in case you needed to remind the room that you didn't shear sheep for a living. Men weren't left out either. While not quite as judged, men with thick golden locks were often romanticized in poetry and art. Knights with flowing hair charging into battle were the medieval version of shampoo commercials. But married women's hair was banished from public view. Enter the world of veils, wimples, nets, and coifs, a medieval wardrobe of modesty that could make even the most radiant blonde disappear under 3 layers of beige linen. These coverings weren't just modest, they were practical. They protected hair from smoke, lice, and unsolicited compliments from troubadours. The most dedicated women layered their coverings. A coif, a close-fitting cap, might be worn under a veil, which could then be pinned beneath a wimple that wrapped under the chin. The effect? You looked like a pious, well-bundled sandwich, and that was the goal. But fashion is rarely satisfied with just function. As time went on, headwear got more elaborate. Nets were embroidered with gold thread. Veils were starched into geometric shapes. Some noble women wore silken cages for their braids, accessorized with jewels and tiny bells, because nothing says subtle beauty like jingling when you turn your head. And then there were the hennins, those towering cone-shaped hats that looked like they were designed by someone who spent too much time around church steeples. The hennin wasn't just headwear. It was a social ladder you wore. These hats could reach upwards of 2 feet, sometimes even more, especially among the French and Burgundian elite. The taller the hennin, the higher your status, and the more doors you smacked into on your way to dinner. Often made from fine silk, velvet, or brocade, hennins were structured with wire frames, giving them that dangerously aerodynamic shape. A sheer veil usually cascaded from the tip, adding movement, mystery, and a good chance of getting caught in candles. Getting your hair to fit under one of these things was an art in itself. Hair was braided and stuffed up into the cone, or sometimes completely shaved around the forehead. Forehead real estate, again, to help the hennin sit properly. Comfort was not part of the design brief. So while a maiden's golden hair flowed freely, a married woman's was imprisoned in silk and height. And the message was clear: her beauty was no longer for the world to see. It belonged to her husband, her God, and her tailor. But even with all these layers, there remained one final frontier of medieval beauty: the moral balancing act between looking virtuous and looking vain. That tightrope walk is where our next chapter begins.